Welcome to 0.24%, the podcast named after one of the most shocking statistics in the UK venture capital scene. In 2024, just 0.024% of VC funding went to black male founders. This show is about the stories behind that number. It's about the visionaries who build in spite of it, the founders who keep going when the system isn't built for them, and the power of community, mindset, and belief when the odds are stacked against us. Today, I'm sitting down with someone who embodies that spirit, Eric Masaba. Eric is the founder of Texi, a company that reimagined how we move through our cities. But more than that, Eric is a deep thinker, a listener, and a visionary. His journey isn't just about business, it's about resilience, self-belief, and the discipline of holding onto a vision even when the world tells you to stop. In this conversation, we'll talk about the realities of being an underrepresented founder, what it means to survive and still thrive, and how mindset and manifestation can carry you through when nothing else does. This is about more than fundraising. It's about community, it's about possibility, and it's about rewriting the rules. So Eric, welcome to 0.24%. So let's start here. When people ask who you are, not what you do, how do you answer?
I just have to tell them I'm a guy from Liverpool who just had some ideas. I've been very fortunate in the opportunities I've been given or have taken, but obviously they had to be given to start with. I don't necessarily fit an easy box, so I don't want to always say I'm a black person or a Scouser or whatever. I am who I am, and those things are obviously core to my identity. They don't always define me, even if they can create difficulties, and let's just say they can make certain doors harder to go through. But fundamentally, I'm just a guy like anybody else who grew up watching TV, wanted to be an astronaut, an inventor, drive a Knight Rider, fly an Airwolf, all those different things, which is what a lot of the engineering choices people make come from. What you watch on TV in the 60s, I'm sure, would have been Thunderbirds and Fireball XL5. There'll be Gen Zs here who have no idea what those things are, but Thunderbirds was something we used to watch in the 80s about international rescue with their amazing flying machines. And obviously, as a kid, I would see these things and think, wow, I'd love to know how to build those things. It would be fantastic if I would have the knowledge to do it. So I pursued engineering. I was looking at science and engineering since I was a small boy. I was very fortunate that, especially my mother, didn't find that strange or tell me, oh, people like us don't do that, whatever else. She literally would just say, I'll get you some engineering books, or here, there's a friend of the family who is an engineer or a scientist and you can talk to him. So I've always just seen myself as somebody who was interested in engineering. And of course, I'm black. That goes without saying. When people see me, they're going to see a black person. And that, unfortunately, will, for a lot of times, colour their perceptions of what I'm capable of. However, what I've also found is that when you are very good at what you do, people stop seeing you. And I'm sure you've experienced this as well. You become you. You're not black anymore. You're not a Scouser anymore. You're not a whatever. You're this person who can get things done, who has good ideas. And thank you very much for that description of me as a deep thinker. I've never heard that one before, I must admit, but it's very nice here.
You know, I have a similar journey to you in that I was shaped by a lot of the things that I watched on TV. I think I can proudly say I'm a bit of a geek. I'm into my science fiction, which is based on some of the things that I watched as a child. Every single program that you mentioned, I watched. Fireball. You missed UFO.
Oh yeah.
You missed UFO and Space 1999.
Yep.
You know, so those are some of the programs that kind of shaped my curiosity and thinking about the future. And you know, you're so right. I mean, I don't think it was until I was about 14, and I think I mentioned to you this before, that I didn't actually see my colour. I was just this boy who had his mates, and I was just playing with my friends in school. And then it kind of kicked in one day that I had big lips and a big nose. And so I started trying to hold my lips in, and you know, trying to make my nose a little bit less big. And I think that was my first memory of realizing that I was black and that I was different.
I can see how that would have happened. I was somebody who, in almost all the environments, I was the only black kid. So I kind of knew I was black, but it didn't really matter until I became 11. So very similar sort of trajectory to you. I never wanted to be anything else. I was just me. I'm not going to lie. Didn't like the racism that sometimes happened. But for whatever reason, it made me even more determined to just continue to be me. I didn't want to not be black. I never had that wanting to bleach my skin or disappear, whatever else. I just wanted to be treated the same as everybody else. If I'm a naughty boy, I'm, you know, held to account. If I'm good, I'm rewarded, or whatever else. And for the most part, that did happen. But as you know, especially in the attitudes in the 70s and 80s, it wasn't always the case. It's very hard to convince people that black people are just people. There was this whole idea that you won't be into science or engineering or anything else. I was very fortunate to be selected for the Blue Coat School, which is a selective grammar. I remember the Times describing it as a thinly disguised grammar school because of its ridiculously extreme grades at A-level, under the late great H.P. Arnold Craft, our headmaster then. And this school was a case of only 90 people got in every year, and it had that kind of, if you had a grandfather or father or brother at the school, you can go in, it was all boys. So it was actually a case of you had to be good at sports, academics, or music. So in some respects, I got respect for just being the person who got good exam grades and whatever else there. I'm not going to pretend it was people just gave me a pass because I was black. They didn't. It was 1985. It was difficult, but I got to know people in my class. They got to know me, and I was just Eric rather than whatever else. Unfortunately, people in the higher years, they just saw a black kid. There's only 6 of us in the school, and that was challenging. However, that actually gave me the inoculation, the thick skin for what came later. Seriously, because when you can get through that, then there's nothing anybody's going to call you. You haven't been called literally 10, 15, 100 times a day. That's how bad it was in the first couple of years, mid-80s. The National Front was very big and very powerful. Since the late 70s, early 80s in the UK, people felt worried about mass immigration. There were ideas that black people were not up to scratch and were bad and were taking jobs, or they were unemployed at the same time, which was always interesting. Which one is are they lazy and not having jobs, or are they taking their jobs? How can both things be true? But as you know, narratives like that don't need much to stick. The interesting thing was, I'm sure you've heard this, I would have people say to me once they got to know me, I hate black people, but you're okay.
But you're okay. Yeah.
And I would ask, how many black people do you actually know? Well, just you. Well, that's 1 for 1. That's 100%. So shouldn't you take a different view? There was never any, I guess, logic to it. People react on how they feel. They don't necessarily, they can't rationalize it. And as they say, the heart wants what the heart wants, or fear comes from a place where we don't even know. A lot of what we think we want, just as you discussed about watching same programs, Fireball, XL5, UFO, Space 99, Blake 7, all those things, those are put into our heads with marketing. So when we think we want something, we're being maybe manipulated or primed to want that thing. When you think you hate somebody, is that really what you really think? Because how is it that you can have a different view about the one person who is black that you do know, and then this nebulous idea of blacks generally, none of which you've met. It's always been strange to me. It's because of my scientific type mindset. I think constantly I love to know how things work. Why is this thing like this? Why is it E equals mc squared? Why is it one take away, the square root of one take away v squared over c squared? I just want to know. And I wanted to know about science, engines, finance, just anything. I was very fortunate that Blue Coat was exactly that type of environment. They also, whatever was going on, if you got the grades, you got the grades. There were other organizations like the Air Force where that was also true, and this was very important. So as bad as things were, what I took away was there are enough decent, fair people that even when society at the time might not have been as enlightened as we would have wished for, ultimately, the people around you in your life, I mean, I think you can attest we'd both be dead if if there weren't decent people and the systems weren't held up.
I mean, let's take it back a little bit here, Eric, in terms of, just to get some context. Your parents came from Uganda, and you were 7 when you came.
I was 2.
2
and a half, yeah.
Okay, and so. And coming from you, so being 2, you didn't really, or did you notice the culture shift, or was that not something that you were aware of because you were so young?
No, my memory starts at 0, so I can remember details, which still shocks my mother. She can't understand, how could you remember the colour of your uncle's car when you would have been 1 at the time? As I asked her once, who was the uncle who had the orange Beetle? And she'd look at me with intense curiosity, but you were 1, that was your uncle, whoever, and yeah, he had an orange Beetle, but how could you know this? Well, I could remember the school. I went to nursery when I was 1 in Kampala, and we grew up in you understand that Uganda was a highly productive economy up until the Idi Amin. It was touted as one of the success stories of the post-colonial age. So from anywhere from 1962 right up to probably even the mid-70s before Amin really went mad, it had a really high growth trajectory. It was being touted as a place which was going to redefine what it could mean to be African or whatever. So did Zimbabwe, funny enough. Zimbabwe had some of the highest education levels of anywhere in Africa. Places like Singapore were looking to Uganda to inform them of how to organize the country, because as you know, Singapore split from the Malay Federation in 1967, and they had a very rough road ahead. They didn't know how it was going to work. So it was interesting that all the sort of people, the milieu we moved in within Kampala, they were a lot of expats, the great and the good of Ugandan society. And I don't recall there being, for me anyway, a culture shock. I just adapted. Maybe it's because I was so young. It was a lot colder, obviously. That's the first thing I remember. But I spoke English only when I came over, so that wasn't an issue for me. My mum had trained as a physiotherapist in the 60s. She'd won a scholarship, so she'd gone to university, which was hard enough for anybody, let alone people from other countries, in 1965, 64, 65. My father, he did his PhD here in the Pool Tropical School of Medicine. That was 1977 to 80. He'd done a master's at Kansas State, so they were both internationally educated. So I guess we could kind of start again, although obviously as I've gone through the sort of ages in the last 15, 20 years that my mother would have been when she had to uproot and move, I have nothing but the utmost respect for how difficult that must have been. I mean, can you imagine when your kids are 2 or 3 being uprooted and say moving to Hungary or something and having to start again? That's what she had to do. And so when I consider that, I think all the difficulties I've had, they pale in comparison to what she would have had to do to bring us up.
Okay, and you mentioned your parents both being academically gifted, and they were both in very good positions. Would you say that they shaped you into the kind of visionary who doesn't really think in limits, or would you accredit that to your environment or to friends or to other factors?
No, that comes from my mother, who, whatever I wanted to do, she never put blocks in my way. She never said anything like, that's not what people like us do or whatever else. There was nothing like this. She also wouldn't, The only criteria that mattered to her was somebody was doing something, was educated. It didn't matter what color or wherever they came from. The only thing that mattered was that they had some sort of vision and they weren't time wasters. So that meant that all the people surrounding me were, and that was all my mother's doing, were, you know, accomplished people, doctors, engineers, whatever else. I mean, she worked at the hospital. She only knew doctors and consultants and the physios. So that was very important. The key thing is, when I said things like, I'd like to learn this computer stuff, she get me a computer. Or if I asked her questions about rocketry, she wouldn't. She'd say, oh, I'll get back to you on that one, and go and find somebody who knew something about it to talk to me. That's just how it was. If I wanted to go to the engineering section of Central Library, which was very, very good, and that's one of the key things which helped Liverpool through a very hard time. The fact that the council kept things like the local library system open, that's very, very important. So I could go there, I'd spend every Saturday, that was my thing I did. I'd go to the library, I'd go to the second floor of the Central Library in William Brown Street, and I would get out university texts on engineering and science, even though I was 8 or 9 years old, and nobody sort of said, that's too much for you, young man. It was just a case I'd be helped, and these are the things that create the foundations.
So what did you find interesting about reading those types of books? Because at that young age, most people are reading James and the Giant Peach, or, you know, some other type of fairy, the Grimm Tales by the Brothers Grimm. But you're there reading engineering books. What was it about those types of books for language that attracted you?
I just wanted to know how things worked. If I saw something on Thunderbirds, could that work? How would that work? What does that mean? Why would they do it this way? Or Captain Nemo? I remember watching a Captain Nemo thing. It just blew my mind. The steam tech, the chrome stuff when he says
the cyberpunk.
Yeah, I just loved that. I wanted to know, how does that work? I had some similar geek friends, I guess, just like yourself. I don't even think the term geek existed yet in the 80s. Nerd did, but not geek.
No, we were nerds.
Yeah.
We were nerds.
Nerds. I don't know when geek came about, but I don't remember anybody using the word geek. Then there was on TV, there was WizKids about the computing, but ever then you had a Commodore 64 Spectrum, and then I learned to program. I taught myself programming when I was 8 to 8.5, and then machine language at 9. I wrote my first compression algorithm on the VIC-20 without knowing what it was. I just did it. I needed to fix something, so I wrote something to fix it. And to her credit, my mum never discouraged me or never behaved as if anything I was doing was strange. So I would just literally do things, and nobody looked at me as if I shouldn't be doing them. And I wasn't getting into trouble. I wasn't doing graffiti or getting arrested. I mean, I was going to the library, and I just loved doing that. I learned to read, my mum tells me, when I was 2. So long before I even went to school, I could read. I'm not sure how that happened, but it did. So I'd read most of those books like James and Giant Peach, and Roald Dahl was my favourite author. The 2 favourite authors I had, Roald Dahl and Nicholas Fisk. A lot of people don't know Nicholas Fisk, but he had a few things made on, if you remember, Starstormers. And
No!
Oh my God, that was a great thing. That was a Nicholas Fisk book. And he wrote a lot of other books, and I loved his books. And every week I'd go and see if I could get some out. And I'd read them, and I'd read them again. And obviously there's John Wyndham, who wrote the Chalky series and whatever. So there's a great tradition of British sci-fi. And that by itself is one of the key things, is the foundation on which so much British inventiveness comes on. If you don't have a reading culture, you don't have people who can get interested in things. You need a reading and an engineering, sharing its stories and ideas. Think of, obviously the French have it as well, was Jules Verne, but we've had it with so many great scientific authors. Logical fantasy, I believe John Wyndham called his ideas, and the Midwich Cuckoos.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Which is Children of the Damned, that got made as a film.
That's right, yeah. I remember the original.
I love that stuff. So when you want to know, is that believable? If I was to write a story, I would need to know enough about what's possible. There are obviously things that frustrated me. You don't learn differential calculus till you're 14 or more. So there were things where I just couldn't quite understand yet. Another friend of the family he's now Sir David King, the former chief scientist, and he was the head of chemistry at Liverpool University before it became head of chemistry at Downing College and became chief scientist. But he was from Zimbabwe, I think it was, and he'd moved here in the 70s. And my mum's best friend was a South African family from Cape Town. Well, they were Welsh, but they'd been born or brought up in South Africa, but they got thrown out for protesting apartheid, so they came back to the UK. And, still a very good friend of my mum's. And this was because when Sir David King, when he was just David King, moved here, he would know, obviously, South Africans. So one day, I remember 2 of his sons came to Bluecoat, and one day, one of them had told him, "Oh, there's this guy in my school called Eric, he's quite smart. Can we invite him to the chemistry lab?" So I found myself on an invite to the chemistry lab at Liverpool. And then again, just like nobody being weird or whatever, he just asked me, "Hey, Eric, how big do you think the universe was 1 second after the Big Bang?" So I immediately answer with the speed of light. It must have been the sphere. This way. Oh, that's interesting. I see why you say that, and everything else. And again, if you think about it, one of the main things a kid needs is encouragement. So even though there have been obviously difficulties, everybody has difficulties in their life, I choose to remember all those positive things. They absolutely made up for a lot of those other annoying things that happened. Because I'm thinking, I was given those opportunities, I was treated as a human being, and I got to do the things I did because you can either focus on the negatives or you can focus on the positives. Even though VC funding remains elusive, Guy Kawasaki, who turned me down, said we don't use cabs in the United States. Fair enough. A lot of people couldn't see what I'd invented or how big it was going to be back in 2007. He gave a funny talk where he says your likelihood of getting funded is like being struck by lightning while you're underwater in a swimming pool on a sunny day. So it's bad enough for everybody. And also it's to do with networks.
Is that for black people or is that for everyone in general?
He says everyone in general. So if a black person, it'll be in an underground swimming pool, with lightning rods around it as well to make sure it never happened. So what's interesting about that is there are ways you can get around it. And I actually raised the same as what would have been not big, but smallish VC raise through angel investors via people I worked with in investment banks and hedge funds.
Well, let's just hold that thought for a second, Eric, because my next question is leading to that. And there's so much I want to ask you about in terms of, I just want the viewers to actually understand a little bit more about you in terms of how, and I hate to use this word, smart you are, but if you can just give the listeners a quick resume, 2 minutes of your academic achievements, because they are quite stunning.
Well, I think the key thing is there's lots of very clever people, yourself, for example, who might not show up on those normal scales or wherever. I was lucky enough that I found standardized testing easy enough that I could get very high grades. It would work. I put the work in. I wasn't lazy. I put the work in because I was really interested in it. So I did, obviously, the GCSEs. This was 1990, so I did the 9 GCSEs. I did 6 A-levels and a couple of special papers. I was very lucky that although I caught hepatitis, and so I missed about 3 months of my lower 6th year, and usually that'd be grounds you'd have to do the year again, but I was able to get through. Then I got an offer to go to Imperial College, but I got a year out where I was able to go and work for National Grid, and bizarrely, they gave me a job as a full research scientist. I was 18, hadn't gone to university yet, and they gave me a supercomputer and an office. I was at their research and technology site in Leatherhead thinking, wow. And for me, there was nothing, I couldn't believe I was getting paid. They're going to give me a supercomputer. I've got access to all these books. I can ask all these scientists anything I want. And they put me on this project a literal live project to help put more power down power lines. And I had a mentor and he just literally said, oh, what do you want to know? Right, this is what we're doing. It's something called a Chebyshev polynomial. I don't even know what that is. I haven't been to university. Oh, here's a book. Read up on it. And that's how I would do it. So I learned to program Fortran there. I learned VAX VMX, Ultrix Unix, helped them build a system, programmed the whole thing for the overhead lines division. It's probably very bad code, but it kind of worked. And they were saying, we don't even know what you've done, how you've done it. We don't know how you've built this. Can you write it down? Or try to write it down. Then went to Imperial Aeronautics, and when I was there, I got to join the Air Force as well. There was more of an accident. I wasn't planning on joining the Air Force. I just went along and saw this table where they're saying join the Air Force now. What's it entail? Oh, well, you get to learn to fly. Oh yeah, sign me up. And then I went for an interview. I happened to know a few geopolitical things which might have just swung it for me going there. I was very fortunate again. Imperial was a challenging degree. Very, very tough, very hard, very thorough. But this is what enabled me to do things I would do later. Again, I think whenever you've got difficulty, and this is what I've since learned called the Stoic principle, don't be angry at the difficulty. Be happy for it, because when you get through it, and you've got to decide you will get through, you've got to manifest that desire to overcome whatever difficulties in your path, you'll be stronger and more equipped. You'll have new skills that you didn't have before. You'll be able to fix a problem that you didn't even know could happen, and now you've been through it and you can fix it. And sure, it's painful, but I think pain is a signal of learning generally.
You know, I'm sat here and I'm listening to what you're saying, Eric, and I'm so enjoying this conversation, and I've got a smile on my face. It's a shame that we're not actually filming this session, but that will happen soon. I'm really enjoying this conversation we're having. So, after leaving university, and you've been part of the Air Force, and you've had success, both academically and also outside of academia. What was the spark that made you look at transport and say, we can do this differently?
Of my third year, I did an exchange year with a French university called École Centrale de Lyon, and this is one of the 5 top French universities. Now, they do an exchange with Imperial and MIT and other places. Anyway, so that was in Lyon, and a beautiful city, really underrated. I haven't been for a while, but I'll go back soon. And their third year project they asked me to look at was something called ride sharing. And they had, in those days, there were mobile phones, but they're really, really expensive, and students never had them. And I'd had one during my job at Swiss Bank in 95 and 96, but not while I was at university. So what you had to do to organize trips was you had to go to the notice board and write down where you want to go, potentially ask for a trip. You'd leave one of those A4 things with torn off strips that people can tear off, or people might say, I am going from Lyon to Clermont-Ferrand or Lyon to Paris or wherever, and if anybody wants to come, let me know and meet me here and we'll share the trip cost. So they were trying to use email to do this, the brand new thing called email. Now, email had been around since around 1992, 93 for universities. For actual undergrads and universities, they'd had it since the 60s in specific research places. But even an engineering course like aeronautics, a lot of people didn't even use email even on that. So I can't imagine what it was like with humanities subjects. So this was an engineering university through and through. So people did use email. So you had to go to the email lab to check your email to see if anybody had requested a trip or responded to your trip. And this was crazy because it was a bit of a trek across the campus. So I remember thinking, how could we do this better? And mobile phones wouldn't become mainstream until probably 1999. And even then, SMS messaging, people wouldn't really get that, especially in the United States. In the United States, 2005 onwards, but in Europe, 99 onwards. So what happened was, I came up with some ideas and I thought, not sure how this will work with this, but it was on the back burner. Then after Swiss Bank, so 98, 99, I did something for a group called FX Exotic Options, which was basically a lot of bets you can do with foreign exchange, when you do currency crosses like GBP, USD, or This was just before they changed over to get rid of the French franc and the German mark, and they went into euro. So a lot of those crosses disappeared. So what happened was I only came back to this after one of those stoic type things which happens, one door closes and then a better one opens. I found myself prevented from taking up a job, an H-1B visa in the United States, which had taken me a year of interviews, phone, email, then an in-person 10 days, because they were impressed enough to meet me at this hedge fund in Connecticut to see, are you really the guy we've been talking to? Because we liked your answers, but we have to check you're a real person. So they paid for me to fly over, have a look around and whatever else. Then I got told, oh, your visa's been rejected by the US State Department. They even intervened over the top of the US CIS people and the Homeland Security. So this was odd. I wouldn't find out for 8 more years why that was. And then they really told me in April 2004, you're really not coming back. What the hell? So that's annoying. As annoying as that is, you've got to live. So I thought, well, the project they wanted me to do, which was on something called credit contagion, we were looking for companies which are going to default. So you can actually predict which companies are going to go bankrupt. Even if you know nothing about the company, you can look at certain other indicators, the equivalent to, say, temperature and pressure of a company, things called CDS spreads and the equity prices, and you can look at the direction of the equity price, the amount the CDS spread, which is just an insurance payment you got to pay, is going, and you can figure out this company's probably going to go bust, so let's short it or let's buy insurance on it or something. And I realized that mathematics would actually fix that rideshare problem I'd seen 5 or 6 years earlier at that French university. I thought, this is interesting. If two people who don't know each other might be going the same direction, they just don't know. And if there was a way to know where people are going, even if they didn't know who they might share with, we could group them up. We could have the computer say, hey, you know what? There's somebody else going to Clermont-Ferrand from Lyon at this time, or roughly this time. You two could share, or you 4 could share. So I thought, let me just do a quick sum on this, because this is the same as we're trying to do for companies. Sometimes one cluster of companies will go bust all in one. If Ford, for example, is going to go bust, which it did, and it was flashing red on our model back in 2003. If Ford was about to go bust, it would take down all the suppliers to Ford. If you sell windscreens and windscreen wipers and tires and batteries to Ford, you're going to go bust if they go bust, because you're going to get so much of your revenue from them. If they can't pay you, well, you're going to be in trouble. It doesn't matter what your credit rating is. So this turned out to be the same issue as people needing to ride share. So there's a bit of serendipity coming in here. It's almost like a higher power said, oh no, we've got a better thing for you to do. Your hedge fund job is great, but here's something better. So I went to the president of the hedge fund. They were all a bit annoyed that I'd been banned. And I said, I've got actually a better idea using what we've just done. Let me explain. And they explained. They said, okay. And I purposely took 2 zeros off the total available market, because when you pitch a VC thing, as you'll know, you have to tell them, oh, there's this is a problem, this is the total available market, this is what potentially you can capture, all that usual stuff. I kept coming up with $1 trillion just for the US. I thought, that can't be right. I've done a mistake here. And it took me back to when I was 11. I didn't get top marks in the math homework because I didn't believe a bathtub. Your bathtub in your sink, how many liters are in your bathtub? And it's a simple thing. 100, let's say it's 1.5 meters long and a meter wide and 75 centimeters high. It came to hundreds of liters, which just didn't seem right to me. But it was a right sum, and if I just stuck with that, I would have got the marks. And so that was a great thing to get wrong. So I was thinking, this can't be right. And I did the sum over and over again, like an obsessive compulsive. It was $1 trillion each time, so I thought nobody's going to believe me. So I took 2 zeros off, knowing full well they would do the sum. Yeah, it's worth $10 billion. Yeah, no, $10 billion, that sounds good. Let's see. Okay, we'll invest. Then they'll come back, Eric, these sums don't make sense. Really? Yeah, it's $1 trillion. Yeah, it is. When you say, because if I'd said $1 trillion, you'd have thought I was smoking something illegal and you wouldn't have talked to me. So you have worked out now that it's $1 trillion, not 10 billion. Get me in on this.
So can we just establish the time frame of when this was happening?
This was January 2004. Actually, it was slightly earlier. It was November 2003, because the first insight came to me about this. I was trying to explain credit contagion to, although the boss of the hedge fund was an economist, there's a lot of mathematics here, which is a bit, I did further maths and engineering maths and quite a few other bits and pieces, so it wouldn't be easy to explain. So I thought, these companies going bust are just like somebody with a minivan picking people up and driving them to a place, the bankruptcy court. And I thought, oh, that's pretty interesting. And then when I got, prevented from taking my visa, I just went back to this idea and I thought, this is an even bigger market than what we were doing with capital structure arbitrage, which was the area of the hedge fund.
Was it one of those ideas that was always in the back of your mind and that it was trying to push its way forward, but you kept pushing it back because you had this great career, potential career lined up in America?
I think I wasn't pushing it back, but when the opportunity was absolutely not just slammed shut, but welded shut, and then like a massive amount of ordnance drops rocks on this, I can't go back to it. I thought back to that problem which had been niggling at me from 1997, because I was thinking, how would you get people to be able to share? And of course, mobile phones were now a little bit more widespread. I remember seeing something about the billionth text message being sent in the year 2000 or something, because text messaging took off in Europe. Americans hadn't heard of text messages till 2004, 2005. They didn't know what they were. They never heard of SMS. I remember I was usually the first person to have ever sent an American an SMS, and they said, what the hell's this? And they didn't know, but Americans being Americans, as soon as they found out, they loved it. And then before you knew it, they were convinced they'd invented it. So that's how they are.
So at the time when you had that $1 trillion market, what did you think? Did you think, oh my gosh, this is the potential here, And also, because you also described that you knocked a few noughts off because you thought that if you actually came to investors with this potential market space, that they wouldn't believe you, So how far ahead of the curve were you at the time?
I had no idea there was even a curve. I just was convinced that somebody must have done this. I did the type of literary research you could do at the time, which was fairly limited. Remember, this was, Google was only about 7 or 8 years old, and it wasn't the all-powering, all-conquering thing we know now. Facebook didn't exist yet. Facebook was the Facebook maybe, and only in Harvard, okay? It was still the days of Alta Vista.
For some of our listeners, they're not even going to remember this time before Facebook.
It was prehistory. The big search engine was Lycos, InfoSeek, Alta Vista, Ask Jeeves. That's what was going on. So I was doing the research and I was thinking, how come nobody's done this? There was literally, there were people who tried to match you up with carpool stuff. That's been going since the 70s with the oil crisis. But there was nothing in real time. And then because I didn't know any better, I didn't know it was apparently an intractable, insoluble problem, because I wasn't sufficiently educated with the biases that this can't be done or we don't do it this way. I was coming at it from a completely different point of view. It came as an offshoot of a finance project. It just turns out that the finance of credit contagion, the mathematics of the finance of credit contagion is exactly the same as for ride sharing. It's the same class of problem, something called an NP hard problem, which is it's like when you've got a certain number of files and you've got like a thumb drive, which is only let's say it's only 256 gig. I mean, that sounds crazy now. I remember when 16 meg was a big thumb drive. I remember seeing my first thumb drive of 16 meg and I couldn't believe that you could have 16 megabytes on something the size of your thumb. And now it's 256 gig you can buy for £5.
So this phrase, ride sharing, where did that come from?
It was from the 70s. It was a very specific phrase which, until Uber redefined it, was meant that there's a vehicle where you're not driving it, but you go into it with other people as part of, say, a carpool or ride pool. Ride sharing is different to car sharing. Car sharing is where you might drive a car, then you park it up and somebody else comes and drives it. That's car sharing. So these had specific definitions. One within the university, I got to talk to quite a few academics. But you see, I hadn't done any study of this. I just thought, this is a problem I know how to solve. in aeronautics, we have, or engineering generally, we have these ideas of toolboxes. Sometimes you can solve a problem which looks impossible in one domain, but you might be able to map it to another domain and solve it there, then map it back. Okay, it's a very classic engineering thing that engineers do. It's a tool set, it's a mindset. So you do with Laplace transforms. You might map something from the time domain into the frequency domain and back again. So sometimes things that seem intractable in one way, if you just know a slightly different way, you can solve them. It doesn't mean you're smarter than anybody else. It's just that you happen to have a different way that happen to work. Even in mathematics, applied mathematics, there's something called genetic algorithms, and that came about because a biologist, an engineer, and a mathematician went to lunch one day, and one of them was saying, "Oh, I can't fix this problem. It would take all the computing power in the universe to blah, blah, blah." And the biologist probably said, I don't know how it happened, but this is the story. John Holland, I think it was, why don't we mate solutions like in biology? Because you can actually get an offspring solution which is getting closer to the ideal thing. It won't be perfect, but it's more the way. Then the offspring mates with another one, and you keep mating until you get a good enough solution. Engineers love good enough solutions. Mathematicians hate them. That's fine. Engineers and mathematicians have very different approaches. A mathematician has to have everything perfect, works all the time. An engineer says, that's ridiculous. This is the real world. It's good enough. We'll get there. Okay? So as an engineer, although I've done a lot of maths, I could see a way to fix that apparently intractable problem. Again, how do you do all those combinations of all the people who could travel together in order to get a good solution in a small amount of time? The answer is use a genetic algorithm. And it's only because we use those for wing design in aeronautics. When you look at the shape of a wing, to work out all the flow of the wing, you used to have to build a model, put in wind tunnel, do all sorts of things. Very expensive, very time consuming. Somebody came up with a mathematical way to approximate the flow of a cylinder, change the cylinder into a wing shape, the wing shape that you want, and then you know where the flow would separate on this wing based on the fact that you're using this thing called a Kutajoukowski transformation. And it's highly specific to aeronautics and fluid flow, but it happened to be why I studied. So I figured out we could use this to solve that problem, and it turns out I was correct. So when I was lucky enough to have most of my backers were people who were engineers from Imperial or other universities who worked at Swiss Bank, quite a few economists, but they respected me enough to say, let's go, let's do this. So I started the patent stuff in late 2004, early 2005. I didn't realize that this was a real thing for a lot of academics, people like Jim Morris at Carnegie Mellon, brilliant man. He did his PhD paper with Eric Schmidt of Google, a small company called Google. And he tried to fix this problem in the 1970s for carpooling when the oil shock was going on. And of course, what you come up against is that you've got a few problems. One is the market formation problem. You can't get people to ride share unless there are enough people to ride share. And it's chicken and egg. How do you get the first one to start? This problem is being solved in markets, something called a commodities exchange. Before these things existed, you often would get large-scale starvation when crops failed and farmers would go bust because they couldn't sell the crops because they'd failed. So they needed a way to insure the crops, which is a basic way of somebody buying crops from you before you've grown them. But that was an important thing which basically eliminated large-scale starvation from the 1840s onwards. That's the basis of the Chicago Board of Trade, options, and, well, even before options exchanges, definitely commodity exchanges. So this is a key thing. You get rid of famine by getting rid of the risk of so people will try and grow food. So I thought, why don't we look at taxis like farmers who have a risk of nobody turning up? If we can mitigate that risk, we can enable them to be present so people can get ride sharing, so we can fix this problem with markets. We can also fix that coordination problem and grouping everybody up in different ways with NP-hard type genetic algorithms where they solve NP-hard problems. That's just the basic idea. It's nothing amazing. It's like you can come up with a recipe. You haven't invented the ingredients, but you put the ingredients together in a new way to have a new texture or flavor, and that is something, and that makes it patentable. So I came up with this. I was lucky enough to use a software solution, which the modern web now uses what we call MVC patterns and NoSQL distributed databases, and it seems like the norm now. But back then, 22 years ago, if you talk about NoSQL heresy, they'd burn you at the stake. It's not a proper database. How can you talk about, not using relational databases? But the thing I was using was a NoSQL encrypted replica, a model view controller system, which enabled me to rapidly prototype and get something working. We did it with SMS to start with because that was the only thing people used in 05. But by 06, we had an app on the O2 XTA, which is a phone no Gen Z will have ever heard of. But before the iPhone, because there was a time when nobody had an iPhone, the only sort of smartphones you had were Palm Trios, Blackberries, and Nokias, basically. And this O2 XTA was the first touchscreen phone which had GPS, and GPS was only good to about 50 to 100 meters, but that was better than nothing. So when I took all these different components together, I thought, wow, this could be huge. Turns out it was.
Turns out it is.
Totally. I mean, before the crypto boom, I believe it might even still be the largest single invested tech category in history. And I was told by a lot of people, this can't be done. You're daft, PhD people have tried it and they can't get it done. But again, back to the start of the conversation, because I never was raised with this idea if I shouldn't do something or couldn't do it, I just have a go. And so in a way, how you do anything is how you do everything. I've always approached things of, why shouldn't I do this? If I'm going to go and try this, I'll go and try it. Why shouldn't I?
That's really interesting, because you then took the idea, got some investors, built a small team, and you came back with Taxi. And as we all know, being a founder is difficult, but the path to innovation for black founders especially is really straightforward. So now you have Taxi. What kind of barriers did you come up against? Because I'm sure you came up against barriers.
Well, what was interesting was this was before video conferencing was as widespread as it was. And my voice, Americans never knew I was black anyway, which helped probably. Even at that hedge fund, they'd been interviewing me for a year. And Bill hadn't told him, the president of the hedge fund, he hadn't told him I was black, because that's actually legal in the United States.
Oh.
So when they paid for me to go to the hotel, they picked me up, and then when the lift opened, they're shocked. They did it quite well. Later on they would admit, my God, we didn't let you know you were black. Okay, well,
I've had that as well. It's so funny when you speak to people on the phone, and then on one occasion I was on the phone to some guy, and there used to be a colour called the N-word brown, and the guy actually he said yeah that colour. And I said to him, I thought I'm just gonna play with him a little bit. So I said, you do know that I'm black, don't you? And he was so apologetic on the phone. And I just thought, you can't be using that type of language on the phone because of your own biases. And that's the reason why I had a little play with him. But being able to alter your speech to fit into a situation, I think is really important. And when people say, "Oh, you speak well," is that a compliment or is it a diss?
Yeah, I really can see why that could get people really down. But I found that even being a Scouser now, my Scouse accent, it's somewhere. It pops up every now and then, depending on who I've been talking to. Americans wouldn't even know what Scouse accent is, and they can't hear regional accents, and they can't hear class. So that's why so many Brits can, work in America and do well, and they wouldn't have got that opportunity here. And in a way, the Americans, when you, especially at elite level, remember that I only got that face-to-face interview after 9 months, 10 months of, they were giving me these math quizzes and asking me options theory and stuff, and we rung up, okay, let's go through this, and then go through this, what is this called, and whatever else, and just so happened, I don't know, maybe I was just lucky, could have gone any other way, but they said, no, this guy, he knows what he's doing, and also had a recommendation. So it was interesting, and what I've never done is, as long as somebody gives me a chance to demonstrate what I can do, and think about the way the color bar was broken, Now, they didn't do DEI, they didn't do quotas. Jackie Robinson got there because he had to be super exceptional. But I think he would just want to be given the chance. As long as I can show I can do this, what do you care? And that was how the hedge fund world's like that, actually. Because it's so hard to generate alpha, as in returns, like, 3x or 5x or even 0.2x above, whatever, that they can't be that choosy. If you find somebody who can just do what you need to do, you're going to say, I'm just going to pay this guy. Britain isn't always like that. Britain has
I think it's less so.
Yeah, it has a... you need to know your lane, you need to know your place. They didn't even allow... I don't know if you know what the Big Bang was in the 80s, when the city was deregulated. But before Margaret Thatcher, actually, government put these laws in, if you were a pleb, if you were from the working classes, the most you could be was a barrow boy in the city. And all the proper jobs, for people who wine and dine clients, whatever, that was your Etonian set. And it was a full 3-tier set. Your front office was always your public school educated people, and the ones who got the more plum sales jobs would be from and that's fair enough. If you're selling investment banking products to the ultra rich, in those days the ultra rich were from that class, and they'd want to deal with people from their class. So it's assortative selling, I think you would call it. People like to associate with people like them, right? Now, the Big Bang upended all this, and if you were a person with skill, they'll pay you because you're going to make them more money, and you will get a bit of the money you made them. That's kind of interesting. It might upset certain structures. I know France was definitely like that in the 70s. Not in the 70s and 90s. France was something like 20 to 30 years behind the UK in how it didn't allow people to transcend their class. Okay, so it was highly stratified. But the Americans, they didn't care, and they got past me being black pretty quickly.
So why do you think, Eric, that the statistic that this podcast is named after is the way it is, 0.2?
I think it's more to do with people not even knowing how to get VC, because VCs are to do with networks, ultimately. And if those networks make sure... Think about football before... you might remember the first black footballers. It's interesting to think there was a stage where it was a novelty that you could have a black soccer player. That was in our lifetimes. That was Cyril Regis, or the
Fashion News.
They were the spearhead, and you needed Ron Atkinson. I know people slag them off for being a ist or an obe or whatever, but at the end of the day, Ron Atkinson just said, I don't care. Could be green, it could be from Mars, can he play? And you got to hand it to him, right? And in that respect, you needed a scout who would go and look and say, look, we're missing talent. I don't know if you know about the history of the Harlem Globetrotters, but there was a guy called Larry Saperstein. He was a Jewish guy from Chicago. And he growing up, he lived amongst black people, and he said, wow, these guys can really move and wherever else. Why aren't they playing basketball? Because in those days, black people didn't play basketball, really. They literally, they weren't allowed to compete on the same field. Baseball, basketball, football. It seems strange now, but that's how it was. So Saperstein, he put together a team. He would play guard or whatever, and he would drive in the car. He would drive them, and the team, this one white Jewish guy and these 4 black players, they're playing, they kept beating people. That's how the Harlem Globetrotters got started, because Saperstein said, why aren't these guys there just as good? And, if somebody's not, now it's called arbitrage, if somebody's not giving people a chance, it doesn't need to be fair. There's an opportunity I can make money. And look at the NBA. Nobody is going to give you a chance just because of your color in the NBA. Do you think they're going to say, we don't have enough redhead people here? Listen, get rid of all these guys. Doesn't matter what rushing yards you get some redhead people in. That would be ridiculous. But what has to happen is, if it did happen that Larry Birds or whatever, there was a bunch of people who just happened to have red hair from Boston or something. They're really good. Remember Larry Bird? Boston Celtics. He was one of the greatest of all time players. He could just play. There's no doubt about it. So he's on the team, not because he's white, not because he's red-haired, not because of whatever. He just can play. Now, when we when we can expose the talent that's clearly there in a way, look at Ron Atkinson, look at Larry Saperstein, they had to go and say, these guys can do everything the same as everybody else and they're not being recognized. That's a talent pool we haven't exploited yet. Let's go and do this. Even if it has to be me, if I get paid, when I get paid, that's what I do, because I know there's going to be raw hunger and talent, just like people saw with boxing, with football, with anything. If you could get black people, any people riding horses, you probably find there's quite a lot of talent there which hasn't been exploited. Hardly anybody from the working class rides horses. I know you get jockeys who might do, but in terms of equestrian and show jumping, it's still a very elite sport. Tennis, for example. I mean, I remember watching a podcast about why aren't there more black world's strongest men or weightlifters. The reality is there's hardly any money in that compared to if you've got athletic ability, you might as well go out for one of the big four sports, baseball, football, basketball or hockey. Why would you waste your time doing world's strongest man? So it's more, I think what we need to do is say to people, you can do this. I mean, I did it in the 90s and 2000s, Swiss Bank Corporation. I got in there. They didn't do DI. They literally just gave you Olympic heats.
And you know what, Eric? It's through the history of black achievement, no one has actually given it anything. Everything has always had to be fought for. And I think that to transcend past that 0.24%, we're going to have to do it ourselves.
I was about to interrupt you. I'm glad I didn't, because you made my point. That's exactly correct. If we ask for anything, then we don't deserve it. You don't ask for respect. You command respect. You embody the principles that make people respect you by going about your business in a proper way, keeping your word, doing whatever else. And over time, people say, that guy's a stand-up guy. If you have to go and say, respect me to somebody else, or what's that phrase from Game of Thrones? A king never has to tell anybody he's the king, right? You have to do it for yourselves. China has, if you saw what happened to China during World War II and other parts of its history, the Opium Wars and whatever else, have you ever seen Chinese asking for reparations or special treatment? I've never have. I know there's a billion and whatever, maybe some of them do, but as a general rule, they kind of just knuckle down and say, let's get this done. Just exactly what you've said. We've got talent. We can build things. People are building things. Look at Ryan Coogler in Hollywood, for example, the guy behind Black Panther. Okay. An interesting thing, if you've seen Creed, the Rocky spin-off, have you seen that film? I have. Well, the guy who plays the boxer, he's a Scouser from...
Yes.
Tony Bellew.
Yes.
He's the best friend of my barber. I meet him in my barber shop. It's just bizarre thing. That same barber, once Kerry Katona came to him for, to have a haircut for some reason, just does. Flavor Flav from Public Enemy stopped off there one time. It's really bizarre, just a strange bit of Liverpool, and you get people just turning up and why is Flavor Flav getting a tattoo next door after he's had his haircut here? Or why is Samuel L. Jackson the tapas bar? So, talent will attract attention, not always maybe in the way or the time you want it to, but if you turn up enough, as I have done, and of course, yeah, it's a long slog. For me, 20 years, and I've only got that patent granted 2 years ago after waiting 17 years.
Can you just explain to someone who's just switched on this podcast or someone who's not aware of your story what that patent is all about?
Okay, so harking back to when we talked about when I came up with that travel solution, because I realized the hedge fund mathematics could be applied to, the credit contagion could be applied to ride sharing. I thought people are only going to share if you can give them some confidence that they're not going to be put in with a serial killer or people who they feel uncomfortable with. So we need to create social groups for them. But we also need to know where they're going when they request a cab, where they are when they request a cab and where they want to go to. So we need to geolocate them. Now, those two terms, I might as well have been speaking a version of Chinese Serbo-Croat to most people in 2004. What do you mean geolocation? What the hell is that? What do you mean social network? Really, nobody knew what either of those two terms were. And the people who did know either one wouldn't have thought to put the two of them together, which is the important inventive step in the patent. So my patent was basically on geolocation of social network members, which now went on to underpin a large portion of most of Google's revenues and also Facebook's, because in order for Facebook's social groups to really work, you kind of need to know where people are and you need to know where groups congregate. Also turns out there are military applications for this. So a program called Total Information Awareness, which Admiral Poindexter was running. If you want to find somebody to drop a bomb on their head, you geolocate their phone. So the first thing you do when you might be wanted by the United States military is you don't carry a phone if you want to live a few hours more. However, your friends and family still do. And if I know your social network, I can find you by tracking your friends and family, because at some stage you have got to communicate with them in person. And what's interesting about that is even with some of the basic tech we had in 2005, you could find somebody with 90% accuracy most of the time to something like 10 or 15 feet 90% of the time, just by knowing where their social network was. Once you knew who they communicated with, you'd find them, which is why drone strikes happen for the most part of weddings and funerals, Afghanistan, Pakistan. I know it's a bit macabre and whatever, but it is what it is. So that's what my patent was on, the social graph of geolocation, which underpins so much of the modern mobile web. Okay, nobody, not even me, I didn't think it would be that big. I thought it would be big-ish, but not that big. I didn't think it would underpin things. So I was getting a lot of questions from people who were frankly astonished. Who are you again? Tell me how you came up. Who? And they would never, these are people who don't tell you what their name is. They just appear. Or you'll be sitting on a plane somewhere and somebody next to you will turn to you and address you by name. And you're thinking, did I leave a badge on or something? What's going on? And this would keep happening. And nobody told me that this was a sensitive technology. I mean, I didn't know. I was just banned from going to the United States. And so I had to come up with something. So that's what the patent covers. A lot of people think, oh, it's just a taxi dispatching SMS. No, it's geolocation from any mobile device which uses the other character of a social network to group people for the purpose of either rides or selling advertising. And this was the big problem.
So was your company, Texi, like the embodiment of that patent?
No, never, ever. Note to all listeners, anybody doing any IP, never, ever put your IP in a company. You keep the IP in your name. You create two companies. One's called licensing company, and then you license into an operating company your IP, including the name, which means that if your company's wound up, which if it's valuable, it'll be attacked by big corporations. They'll just launch lawsuits against you to make you run out of money or whatever else. They can't seize your IP that way. And I learned that the hard way because I lost all my IP from a previous startup. And I couldn't use it, and I was thinking, this is just annoying. And nobody tells you that. And so I'm telling people now, never, ever put your IP in a company. Most people have to lose IP at least once to learn that lesson. Okay? So Texi itself, it could have been called anything. It could have been called XYZ Limited trading as Texi. It was called Texi Limited, but even when it was liquidated for an apparent accident of a tax bill which didn't exist, 1.6 million or £2 million tax bill, luckily the official receiver took my side and said, well, this is nonsense, we're not going to do anything, you can set up another company. It meant that I could carry on, I could relicense my IP into there. That was an important thing.
Okay, so do you, from your own experience, do you think that there's a bias within innovation and the whole ecosystem that, and is that one of the hidden challenges that we don't talk about enough?
Yes, it is. I absolutely agree with you. But here's the slight wrinkle on that. That bias is in our minds. We, as black people, seem to think black people don't do this or don't do that. As I said, I was very fortunate. I grew up in a family where no matter how bizarre, if I'm asking my mum for books on nuclear physics, she'd get me them. She'd never say, that's a strange thing, whatever else. If I was into Air Force stuff or astronaut, I was never told that you can't do that because you're black. Now, a lot of people carry, and it's not even just a black thing. You find it with women. You find it with working class people. They'll carry this idea of what success for them, for that identity looks like, and identity is overwhelming. Now, the thing is, the only positive representations for the most part that black people saw for the last 40 years here, sport, music, or acting, basically. And there are black scientists. I've met plenty. I've met them at NASA, met them in all sorts of places. But that's just not necessarily, doesn't get the attention it does of business. I remember when the first time I went to Atlanta in 1995, I'd never seen large numbers of rich black people. I'd never seen such a thing. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I would see people driving sports cars. I'd see, obviously it's probably at least 50% white as well, but I'd never seen visible black success en masse. And there's no reason to in the UK. I mean, 4% black people back in the 80s, whatever, maybe 1%, at least in terms of identification. So, I mean, you're not going to see... Look at Emma Raducanu, the tennis player. If she thought, oh, Chinese people, or well, she's not Chinese, she's half Romanian, half Chinese, British person. I mean, her ethnicity is half Romanian, half Chinese. Her nationality is British. She's as British as anybody else. But if she'd got that idea into her head that I would need to look like something or other to do this, you know, she would have gone nowhere. The important thing is the bias seems to be first and foremost in our own minds that we can't do this. And I'm just going to say, what I've found is when you're in places where talent of any type is hard to find, people are just happy you've turned up and you can do something, right? So one of the key things we've got to do, it's a pipelining issue. I was thinking about DEI quite a lot in the last couple of months, and there were things I was thinking, no, it might work against us, but I do understand that visibility is very, very important. If people never see people like them doing stuff, they'll think that's not what people like us do, and that's why visibility is important, but not at the expense of skill or quality. Do you think that anybody who makes the Arsenal first team isn't capable of being there? I don't think any football team is ever going to just pick somebody to make up numbers. That would be detrimental to the overall quality. So we do need to push this pipeline, and you know, it's important to show people being able to do anything else anybody else does.
I mean, I think that this whole controversy about DEI, whereby the narrative was being pushed that people who weren't qualified were being put into these positions of responsibility, and that it was mainly black people that were being put into these positions and that we weren't qualified to take on board that responsibility. And it's nonsense. It's a nonsense. First of all, the demographic that benefited most from DEI were women. Not necessarily black people, but they were women. And I think that, to try and imply that DEI put people who were not qualified into responsible positions is an insult to those people that are in those positions. DEI was never a mechanism to put people into positions of responsibility simply based on their gender or their colour. People had to be qualified for those positions, and then they were given an opportunity, the same as everybody else, to apply for that position. Because I think people seem to forget that at some point women weren't even allowed to vote. And that was a fight. And then the workplace, women weren't allowed to be in certain positions. They were taken on board and they were in the mailroom or secretaries. And then barriers came down and the opportunities for employment in other positions became available. But unconscious bias amongst mainly male white management stopped those women, people of color, from actually progressing through those ranks?
I do agree with that sentiment. And what I'll just say is this. Remember we both liked Knight Rider. Do you remember season 1 of Knight Rider?
Season 1.
Who was the mechanic in the truck? You know, the truck that the Knight 2000 goes up into. Do you remember who it was?
I don't.
It was Bonnie. Do you remember Bonnie, the tech with the glasses?
I don't.
Well, what was interesting, I was having a discussion with several different AIs, because obviously you can't always take what one says. You've got to see if the same. I'm not saying the validation is guaranteed from any of them, but never ever take one output. You've got to try at least 5 or 6 different AIs to see if is this generally correct, and you'll find something. If it's logically consistent, it'll be repeated across them. If you think about Bonnie in Knight Rider, if you think about Captain Janeway in Star Trek Voyager, if you think about Captain Sisko in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, yeah, here's the thing. None of those characters, their being a woman or being black was the main thing.
No.
It was an incidental. In fact, you don't take away that, the black captain or the woman captain, Jane or Margaret Thatcher. I mean, Margaret Thatcher's gender, it was kind of after the fact. And you got to understand that she commanded so much respect. You had the most male sort of hardcore military commanders. They really respected her. And that was nothing to do with her gender. That was a sheer force of personality. The way Bonnie was written in Knight Rider was just, you didn't think, that's a woman, they've just ticked the box here. She came across as exactly the tech, the competent person who just put up in Michael's, whatever. Same with Sisko in Deep Space Nine. There's quite a few. So it's the difference between writing a character as just a character who happens to be black or woman. And then we've all seen those cringy things where they get the black guy, the token black guy who does the jive or whatever, and it makes you want to just die of shame when you're watching it. And they brought in a character called Reginald something the third in season 4 of Knight Rider as it was jumping the shark, and that was a typical kind of, what is this guy doing here?
But it's as you said before, I think representation is really, really important.
It's very important, but the right sort of representation. Yeah. If you think about what Jackie Robinson demonstrated, okay, fair enough, he had to be 4 times as good, but nobody had any doubt that, well, if he did it, then it wasn't because black people can't do it. He's black, he did it. And even if at some level people didn't think too deeply about it, once that happened, people didn't find it strange that it was there. At Swiss Bank, there were 2 black people in 1995 on the London trading floor. There was a guy called Tuti Aguirre who went up to be a managing director. He was very senior at Swiss Bank. There was me. I remember the mailman, because I would get moved around the floor, he'd always find me. One day I said to him, how do you always find me? And he just looked at me. Are you an idiot? Oh yeah, okay. So it was just one of those things where Swiss Bank, I'm telling you, these people, especially then, the American top of the tree finance guys, Swiss Bank was right at the top then, especially the IT spend. They didn't care. You mess up, you're gone. They don't care if you're from Mars, if you look like Godzilla, if you look like Tinkerbell, you're just gone. I watch people get marched off the floor. So what we need is, before you can have black judges, you need black law students. Before you can have black law students, you need black A-level people. Before you can have black A-level people, you need black GCSE people. Pipeline is important. Obviously, people need, role models is a strong word, but visibility is important, but it's the right sort of visibility. Imagine if the first black baseball player was bad. That would have looked awful, wouldn't it? But they got Jackie Robinson. I'm sure he wasn't the first one they tried, but then if he's hitting those better than .3 averages.
I mean, I've always kind of had the belief that we always need to make it easier for the next person who comes behind us.
We make it easier by commanding respect, being the very best we can.
Yes.
Because as I've said, it's a Stoic principle. Your pain, your wounds, they're the foundation of your growth. If something's not hard, it's probably not worth doing. If you think about what you've achieved in life, it's probably been from difficulties, not from things working out, but from when things didn't work. That's when you earn your stripes. That's when you learn your lessons, which are foundational, which help you through other things. I only knew to separate my IP from my company the second time around, which is why I've still got the IP, my goodness, because of a loss of all my IP in my first company called Agile Managers, which I ran for 5 years and was doing quite well until the .com crash, which there was plenty of evidence for. I just was too arrogant and too young, and everybody's got to go through a cycle or two. You never think the cycle's going to end when you're in it until you've been through one, and then it always does. So I learned after that, the first thing I did was, nope, I'm going to set up a company, which is going to be my holding company for my IP. That will be the only thing I will trade with is me, who's licensed at the IP, and the operating company. And that was a very important thing. So if you take away the very lessons, the very training that would make somebody good at what they do, they will never become good. It's like a spoiled child. You know, if you'd spoiled your kids, they wouldn't have got to university. They needed to knuckle down. They needed to know they had to pass those GCSEs and A-levels and whatever else. If you say, oh, you don't feel like working, don't work, where would they be? It wouldn't be at university. So if we reduce the barriers, I don't think, life's hard enough for anybody, right? I don't think anybody needs any more barriers. We've got some barriers which people might not understand, but they definitely are there. But if you say to people, you can be an idiot and we'll let you off, guess what you're going to get? You can get more idiots. So we need to say to people, there is a pipeline which will reward you fairly. Now, there have been times when I've had people just make marks up on me. And then luckily, there have been other people who said, we've watched this guy, we've known him since he's 11. There's no way he got that mark. We know you made it up. So we're just going to ignore it, right? And so there's a lot of really decent, fair people who don't want you to succeed because you're black. They want you to succeed because you're good. So the most important thing is to be good. And I think we can see that 0.24% turn into something like 2.4 or even 4%, the same representation we have in society's number. And as you know, different groups which might be underrepresented in other areas often concentrate. I mean, look at the over concentration of black representation in football or certain sports in the United States, American football, baseball, basketball, whatever else. Here, obviously, soccer. Well, football. I don't say soccer. That's nonsense, soccer. But again, the way to get more black female tennis players in the UK is to encourage little girls anywhere in areas where they're black to play tennis, not to give them a bye because they would just go in and get slaughtered. When we watch tennis on TV, we are seeing a very cream of the crop. Even people who've got rankings of 200 or 700 would just destroy the average person on the street. They wouldn't even be close. Okay, so it's easy to think that these things are easy. They're not. So I'd say, let's make the system scrupulously fair. Remember that why a lot of black people went into athletics and soccer, American football and all those other things is because you can't deny if that person just runs faster than another person, it doesn't matter what you think of them. Oh, I hate these blacks. Oh. Did he run faster than you or not? Let's check everything. Let's drug test everybody. Let's go. They're the results. Okay? We can do the same thing with certain open testing. I got there. My sister, she came top of Leeds University Medical School. Best graduate in 5 years when she did. So, and okay, she went to a good school as well. She went to a girls' school. I went to all boys' school. But the opportunities are there. What isn't yet is self-belief. I've looked at, if you know Nigerians from Nigeria, they're exactly the same as Chinese from China, almost identical in terms of, one kid's going to be a doctor, another one's going to be an engineer, another one's going to be a lawyer. It's just exactly the same. I don't know what happened with the first generation removed blacks. Well, actually, I kind of know. If you get a lot of negative stuff that people always have low expectations of you, yeah, that is going to embed. So what we need to do is that 0.24%. it might be a case of if people don't even know where to apply for VC funding in the first place. If it would be...
And when it's appropriate to apply for VC funding as well.
What you're going to talk about VCs is, I don't think we've got VC industry in Europe. I don't think we've got one in Britain anyway. The private equity and the VC component of the private equity, it's a very risk averse. The funny thing is there's VCs saying they're seeking risk, and the first thing they ask you is how they de-risk. Oh, this seems risky. Aren't you a venture capitalist? Is that not what you do? The American approach is quite different, but then they will chase vibes, they'll chase memes. One of the AIs actually worked this out. I said, actually, if you'd marketed Taxi in 2010 as just whatever else, they would have all chased over the vibe. If you'd marketed from 2012 to this as this, it would have. And the funny thing was, it turns out it really is a mobility as a service with a crypto component, with social networks and geolocation. It's all those things. But sometimes it's just about the vibe. It's like when you see an actor or model who's got a look which fixes the time. So when people are looking for the next Brigitte Bardot clone, if you don't look like Brigitte Bardot, it's not necessarily a racist thing. It's a what sells at that time thing. But in order to get people who look black there, so there can be somebody who looks black, yeah, we've got to get there. There's a chicken and an egg. But I would say the very first thing we've got to do is say to people, don't ever in your mind, it doesn't matter, somebody might think you're not clever. You just do what you do, be as good as you can be, and get better every day. And, at some stage, people are going to just say, you know what, this guy really, that's what happened with me. I'm not saying it's normal. I've been very fortunate. Maybe I'm, in some cases, luckier than others in terms of what I know how to do or what I can learn how to do. But ultimately, I had to get out there, show what I could do. And then people paid me. People said, wow, you can fix this problem for us. Let's hire you. And yet in almost all the places I've ever worked or been, I've been the black guy. And growing up in Liverpool was great preparation for that. So as bad as there's this kind of fractal symmetry here, as bad as all those things were, the things that you think are the challenges are the best training you can ever have. You have to look back and you can say, when that happened and it felt like it sucked, it was actually great.
I used to say, if you can work in Liverpool, you can work anywhere. It gave you that foundation, it gave you that resilience to be able to take on board the slings and arrows, and then to go out into the world and to be able to say, yeah, okay, I've experienced that before. It's nothing to me now.
Yeah, totally. And Liverpool was just bad for, especially in the early 80s to maybe even the mid-90s. It was just, the opportunities had dried up and a lot of people just had to leave. I still know people who still work in London but have a house in Liverpool. They've been doing that for almost 30 years. There's a guy called Dean, who I know from Swiss Bank, and he's been doing that since I met him in the 90s. So he's got a big house in Liverpool, and because he goes down to London on a Monday, comes back on a Thursday night or Friday, whichever, and he's been doing that for a long time. And that's just what you had to do. And of course, there was always this hatred of Scousers. Again, it's funny, Scousers are basically black because people come to Liverpool and they say, wow, this is actually a beautiful city. What all these buildings? Look, you got 2 cathedrals. I've never seen this. This wasn't on bread. But this is a huge city. Look at this. It looks like New York. Yep. But why? You've got bad press. Why don't you tell people? We do tell people, but there's this overwhelming idea that people know about Liverpool. When they actually come in, they look, they say, this is incredible.
It's all about the Beatles.
The Beatles weren't popular in Liverpool until after John Lennon died. I knew nobody who listened to, really, who, even if they did, they wouldn't make a big bones about it. It was hard house. You remember the late 80s and 90s? It was the whole Italo house thing. I don't recall anybody listening to Beatles as such in Liverpool, and we only got the Beatles hotel type stuff from around 2005 onwards. So it's interesting what people, ironically, the Beatles is a great draw for international tourists who have no negative connotation at all about Liverpool, but British people, because of the, I guess how the press view badmouth Liverpool from the late 70s, early 80s onwards, that is still in there. And that's like how people see black people. And then when they get to know them, I hate Scousers, but you're okay. Or I always thought Liverpool was a dump, but had you ever been to Liverpool? No, but I heard it was a dump. But had you ever been here? Because if you came here, you'd see all these things and you realize it's got, the biggest number of grade 1 and 2 listed buildings outside London, and it's only a 20th of the size. It's one of those things.
And so this is the end of the first part of my talk with Eric. You can listen to the rest of it on our second episode. Coming soon.